Welcome to Created Healthy. I'm Dawn Combs. It's a common idea that God gave us everything we need in nature, but do we believe it enough to walk that out in truth? Often the very same people who say this go looking for answers on how to use food and medicine from man-made sources. Everything man creates comes with a user's manual. Why would God be any different? I challenge you to join me in seeking revelation about our body, mind, soul, and spirit health by digging into His written word and in practicing pure science in the visible world of His creation.
Who hasn't heard of the Queen of Sheba? She is definitely one of those women, the interesting women that get mentioned from the Bible, but not a lot is known about her. At the same time, she's a pretty important figure. So today in 1 Kings 8 through 10, we're going to go through her story. And I want to go a little bit off book here. I want to look into her life, or what we can know a little bit further, and see if I think there's some interesting things to be gathered potentially. But first, we need to start with what's going on in these chapters. Solomon has brought the Ark of the Covenant into his new temple. God's cloud has filled the place and chased all of the humans out, and Solomon has blessed the temple. So it has truly been accepted. One of the really interesting things here, especially in light of the Queen of Sheba's visit, is that his blessing sets up the idea that there is more than the quote-unquote chosen people who can come to God. First, Solomon says that when anyone in Israel sins, that they can turn to the direction of the temple. They can turn to where the temple is and face it and repent, and the sin will be forgiven. We have to remember that the temple wasn't centrally located. There were many lands of Israel, and they didn't all get a temple. There was one temple. And so you may be living very, very far away from where the temple is located when you sin. And maybe it's not even feasible for you to take a many-week overland journey to go to the temple. So he's setting up that you can actually just turn and look in that direction and have a relationship with God and be sorry and be forgiven. But in that blessing, he also talks about the foreigner that it may come to the temple. That's in verse 41 of chapter 8. And then in verse 60, he says that this temple is here so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the Lord is God. This is something a little bit different. Before, when God was traveling around amongst his chosen people, he made sure that everybody knew that this was his chosen people because of his presence. And there was a difference between where his presence was and where his presence wasn't. There was mention during that time of the foreigner, and that the foreigner could come and stay amongst them. Maybe the foreigner was a slave. All of them could have a relationship with God by being part of Israel. But now there's this notion that those who aren't part of Israel may come to the temple. And it sets up this visit by the Queen of Sheba in chapter 10. So she hears about his fame, and this says specifically she hears about his fame concerning the name of the Lord. She is interested in traveling because of his walk, because he is known to be associated with the God of Israel, but he is also walking. He is walking out his belief, and they are very rich. Solomon himself is very rich, and Israel is powerful and mighty. And she is traveling. She's traveling because of that. It says that when she gets there, she tests him, and there's much to be had. If you look up the Queen of Sheba, there is lore over the questions that she asks. She comes from a place where people are very wise already. So she respects that Solomon is also wise. She's attracted to this because we know that she's coming from a place where there are many learned men and women, and the fact that she is a leader is definitely to be noted, I think, as a woman. It is a very, if you want to call it, an enlightened place. And so in the midst of all this gray matter knowledge, this human knowledge, she has questions on her heart about the God of Israel. It says that she specifically has questions that are laid on her heart. And she comes and she quizzes Solomon. And she judges him to be wise because of his wisdom, and that wisdom that he professes to be coming from God. Her quizzing satisfies her belief that that is in fact true. She sees the way he is walking in God's precepts. She sees his logic of seeing through nature and seeing through the commandments that God has given and the history that he knows. She sees his strong logic skills to follow a God. It isn't just a local popular thing to do. He has reasons. He has questioned. He has thought it through. And she comes away with a solid understanding of the God of Israel, and she's convinced. This is what we are eventually tasked to do in the new covenant, is to share this, is to teach exactly what happens here. The Queen of Sheba is a foreigner. She is attracted. She's attracted to this knowledge and this wealth, and there's something there that she has curiosity about, and it sets off something in her own heart that is troubling her. I think that we can wonder about, I know as a child, teenager, I guess, I wondered about this notion that, is there really one way to get to God? Is Jesus the way to get there? And maybe there's a lot of other ways. And how can we say that it's somebody who doesn't know these stories that I know from going to Bible school is condemned to hell because they never had a chance to hear? And I think that the Queen of Sheba is a really good person to puzzle over when we have these thoughts, because the Queen of Sheba knew that she was missing something. She was very learned, but she knew that she was missing something amongst all of the wisdom of man. It troubled her heart. And I think anybody who doesn't know the story of Christianity, of the early Israel, people who don't know those stories still can have that moment in their heart, that trouble that causes them to seek. And Solomon was right where he was supposed to be, doing right what he was supposed to be doing, to be able to witness to the Queen of Sheba. The really interesting thing here is looking at some of the things that we don't know who the Queen of Sheba was, really. We have not definitively traced down where she came from or who she is in history yet. But based on what she traveled with, what she had, the time, other kingdoms around Israel that were wealthy and learned, like what the Queen of Sheba is representing, it is likely that she came from, scholars have narrowed it down to Yemen or Ethiopia, and many agree that she came from Yemen. And so, in fact, that is what we believe to be the biblical kingdom of Sheba. If we look a little bit further out, so actually in episode 29, I explored the story of the wise men. And the fact that she brought so many spices and she came from a learned space, it started to sort of tickle my brain to think, I wonder if there's any connection. I wonder if we can prove any connection. Is there any archaeological data or anything that any history that can point us to a connection. And in fact, there are many scholars who believe that the wise men likely came from Yemen. So this is that off book kind of conversation. We can't know everything about every bit of history that is listed in the Bible, and we can't attach too much. I mean, obviously, we can't attach salvation issues to these things, but I'm fascinated by them, and I think that it's kind of fun to look at. So the wise men, when they came from an area of learned people, and they brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And this region that we believe is likely Sheba and Yemen was the only place where Commiphora and Boswellia, that we get frankincense and myrrh from, there were plantations there, and they weren't really growing anywhere else. And there was a gold mine in Yemen. So if we look at the wise men, I think when I probably in episode 29 I touched on this, it's irresistible not to touch on the plants, frankincense and myrrh. As an ethnobotanist, I think maybe I steered away from that, but I hopefully mentioned it. Frankincense and myrrh have a purpose. They had a purpose in ancient Egypt, ancient Israel. They were incense that were burnt in the temple. They prepared bodies. They had a day-to-day and sacred use. And I think that we can kind of get our minds attached to, well, the wise men brought those things for Jesus because the gold was kingly. But what if the wise men came because after the Queen of Sheba came away from Solomon, an ancestor of Jesus, what if the Queen of Sheba brought God's relationship and God's story back to Sheba? And the wise men there began to incorporate amongst the man knowledge, the knowledge of God, and they began to study. And that's why they were looking for Jesus. They were learned in what God was promising, even though they weren't among the, again, quote unquote, chosen people. They were learned because of this visit of Queen of Sheba to Solomon. And it was purposeful. It was purposeful in God's plan. If this works out, if my flight of imagination here works out, it's purposeful. God brings the Queen of Sheba, allows this moment in time of her to meet Solomon and to bring the gift of knowledge about God back to her people. Because when he brings Jesus into the world, they go on a diplomatic and a religious pilgrimage to see this Christ child that they have studied and they have watched for and they have waited for. And they bring him gifts honoring that. And they are gifts of return. They are a mirror of what the Queen of Sheba brought to Solomon to get the knowledge. And they bring the gifts again to the Christ child. And with it, there has been conjecture that Mary and Joseph used these amazing, expensive gifts because, again, they were riches at the time of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. They're still riches in the time of Jesus. There's conjecture that Joseph and Mary then used those princely gifts, those priceless gifts, to fund their ability to live and raise Jesus and raise their family, because they were a little bit different than the rest of the folks. So Jesus would have been provided for by this moment in time of God ordaining the meeting between the Queen of Sheba and Solomon. So instead of seeing the frankincense as myrrh and myrrh as something that Jesus was supposed to use, but rather a mirror of the gifts that happen in this chapter in 1 Kings, suddenly the gifts make more sense. They are riches of the region that was gifted by the interaction between the Queen of Sheba and Solomon. And I don't know. I kind of like this theory. It's going to be hard for me to shake this out of my brain. And when I read again about the wise men, I think I will always see this mirror of the Queen of Sheba. But back on book, I think we need to take a look at this moment with the Queen of Sheba and see she was most impressed by Solomon's walk and talk. We have to be really careful as Christians that we are living the way that we profess to believe. We have to be careful about our walk. We can't just be Sunday Christians and then go out into the world and walk a different way and try to walk amongst the world and try to eat with the world and live with all of their modern conveniences and the things that everything is valued. We have to walk differently. We have to walk in our values, because that is it's the true witness, and we don't know how many people God is sending us who maybe has a tickle in their heart, has a question, has realized that there is more than gray matter, and they desire to know this God that you profess. Solomon walked the way he talked, and maybe he set off a chain of events that would affect Jesus, who eventually came out of his line, was promised out of his line. So if we look at that and we realize that every time we walk in front of other people, what we eat does matter, how we take care of our bodies does matter, what we say does matter, because perhaps you're coming into contact with your own Queen of Sheba more often than you think. I pray that God is blessing you today, and that I see you again on another day. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with a friend. And I'm always interested in hearing what God is laying on your heart. So drop me a rating or review, or join the conversation on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube at Dawn Combs Really.